The idea of a long-gone, extremely powerful precursor race is very common in science fiction. In today's episode of Star Wars Galactic Versus, we're taking two of these races and trying to predict which one would come out on top in an all-out war. Hey guys, thank you once again for tuning in to another Galactic Versus episode. As I mentioned in the introduction, we're taking two extremely powerful races today and putting them head to head. Specifically, we're looking at the Forerunners from the Halo franchise and putting them against the Celestials from Star Wars Legends. I think most people are probably familiar with the Forerunners. They play a fairly central role in the Halo franchise, but I know that some of you may not know as much about the Celestials. Don't worry though, before we do the actual matchup, I'm going to take some time to go over both races in some depth. I'm going to treat today's matchup a little bit differently. Usually I'll look at numbers, strength, and basically anything else that I think is relevant. Because we don't really know a whole lot about the Celestials, I'm instead going to focus on pure power and sophistication. Which one of these races is more advanced? For those who want to know a little bit more about the Celestials before watching this episode, down in the description I'm going to put a link to an article on StarWars.com called Galactic Architecture 101 in the History of Centerpoint Station. With that being said, let's now look closely at both races. We'll start with the Celestials. From an out-of-universe perspective, the Celestials were first formally introduced to the Star Wars universe during the Dark Nest trilogy in the mid-2000s. However, the Star Wars universe had long made mention of a precursor race. It's just that in the Dark Nest trilogy, this was formally identified and named as the Celestials. The most famous of the Celestial creations, Centerpoint Station, has featured very heavily in the lore and was first introduced in the Corellian trilogy way back in the 90s. Since then, it also featured heavily in the New Jedi Order arc. From an in-universe perspective, on a basic level, the Celestials are an extremely ancient, very mysterious, and very powerful race in the Star Wars universe. The Celestials were not only technologically advanced, but may have had some degree of control over the Force, or at least some of them did. First we'll talk about tech, then we'll look at their control of the Force. One thing that the Celestials really excelled in on a technological level was the creation of star systems. We learn in the Corellia trilogy that the Corellian system, including its 5 inhabited planets, were specifically placed by the Celestials through their use of the massive Centerpoint Station, a space station in the Corellian system which was larger than the Death Star 2. It is believed that in addition to the Corellian system, the Celestials may have created over 20 other systems in a similar fashion. Also notably, the Celestials created the Maw using Centerpoint Station and through the moving of black holes. The Maw was used to imprison the very powerful entity known as Abeloth. Some have also claimed that the hyperspace anomaly, which prevents travel from outside the Star Wars galaxy, and which I covered in yesterday's video, may have been created by the Celestials, although I do have my doubts. The creation of star systems and other forces of nature, while impressive, does not compare to creating something that has the power to cut off a single galaxy from the rest of the universe, especially the Star Wars galaxy, which is fairly large, coming in at over 120,000 light years. The Celestials existed in an era where there were few other powerful factions. However, the factions that did exist were absolutely dominated by the Celestials and were often used as slaves in the construction of their mighty projects. It's not clear what happened to the Celestials, but at some point they disappeared from the universe. It's unclear whether there were Cottons who, towards the end of Celestial history, revolted as slaves and became very powerful in their own right through the use of Force-based technology, managed to destroy the Celestials, or whether they just left the galaxy on their own. However, even with their presence in the galaxy seriously diminished, their accomplishments and their technologies lived on, and things like Centerpoint Station became a focus of galactic activity up until the modern era. Let's now talk about the Celestials and the Force. Some believe and argue that the Celestials actually created the Force, and that they themselves guide the galaxy and guide basically the future. I don't buy this. The Celestials had to rely on things like Centerpoint Stations to accomplish their stellar construction projects. I imagine if they had full mastery and control over the Force, they could simply move things at will. It's actually never been confirmed that all Celestials were Force sensitive. Although that is true, it is obvious that the Celestials somehow played a very large role in shaping the galaxy, and although they didn't create the Force in my opinion, I think it's clear that at least most Celestials were very, very strong in the Force, likely transcending what is possible for most mere mortals. Again, the problem is that we don't really know a whole lot about the race, and I'm sure some of that is by design. The only real Celestials that we managed to see are the ones from the Mortis arc in the Clone Wars. In canon, as the Celestials don't exist, at least yet, this family hasn't been confirmed to be Celestials. However, in Star Wars Legends, they've been confirmed to be, if not Celestials as they existed back in the day, at least some form of them now. It's also unclear whether the whole family represented all of the Celestials in the galaxy. In that link that I provided below, it mentions that the father, who was a member of the Ones, actually participated in the design of Centerpoint Station. Additionally, the son and the daughter are held to be representations of the light side and the dark side of the Force. Obviously then, these Force wielders are extremely powerful. They can shapeshift with ease, they seem very durable against traditional damage, and just generally, they're very powerful. However, I don't think that they operate on a cosmic scale, which further again I think solidifies my point that the Celestials did not create the Force. Going against this interesting combination of technological advancement and Force wielding is the Forerunners. I've covered the Forerunners in depth many times in my Galactic Versus episodes. They're a very popular candidate just because of how powerful they are, and in a way the Forerunner are often seen as being unbeatable, and in their thousands of years of galactic dominance, they were only bested once, by the Flood, a hellish life form almost impossible to defeat itself. The scale of the Forerunner and their grasp of technology is very, very difficult to imagine. Although I don't want to get too far into the actual matchup, I will say that the stellar manipulation and the astral engineering done by the Forerunner makes that of the Celestials look like children's play. The Forerunner could move planets, solar systems, and it was thought even the galactic plane with ease. Traditional and relatively modest Forerunner structures like the Halo rings were thousands of times larger than even the largest celestial object that we've ever seen, Centerpoint Station. The largest of the basic Forerunner structures, the mythical, came in at hundreds of thousands of kilometers in size. Other structures, like the Trevelyan Shield World, use slip space bubbles to create structures measuring in astronomical units. That is incredibly large. The Forerunner could also live indefinitely through the use of their technology. However, it's likely that the Celestials, through their use of the Force, could do something similar. Probably the most impressive aspect of the Forerunner Empire was their incredible production capacity. The Forerunner measured in the trillions, and they had the ability to pump out things like Halo rings, arcs, without any real difficulty. Guiding their efforts were incredibly smart AI. These AI not only helped the Forerunners militarily, but also performed many functions necessary for the Empire, things like operating Halo rings. With this basic understanding of both empires, let's now take a look at the matchup, and I think it's fairly clear that the Forerunners come into this battle with an extreme technological advantage. I mean, we have seen some stellar manipulation by the Celestials, but nothing that even comes close to matching what the Forerunner did on a daily basis. The Forerunner were able to reseed the entire galaxy after the firing of the Halo rings. They were able to manage an empire that numbered in the trillions. They created suns and also used them to power structures measuring in the hundreds of thousands of kilometers. The real question is whether the assumed Force abilities of the Celestials is enough to overcome this technological advantage. Are the Celestials essentially gods who aren't vulnerable to the basic attacks of non-Force wielders? We know from the Mortis arc that things like the Dagger of Mortis were used to kill Celestials. I do think that a standard Forerunner grunt who comes in contact with a celestial being is going to have a real difficulty killing him. Whether his weapons will work is up for debate. We know that the Rakata perhaps revolted against the Celestials, but we don't know whether they managed to kill any of them. However, I do think that while the beings are quite powerful, something like a tactical Halo pulse should be able to take them out. I also think the Celestials will have a tough time doing any damage to the Forerunner. We know that Forerunner technology is very, very sturdy. Their warships basically swat away modern day Halo ships, which arguably aren't as powerful as some of the stuff we see in Star Wars, but are still no laughing matter. The Celestials' most impressive stellar engineering feat is, if we believe it, the creation of the hyperspace anomaly surrounding the galaxy. That's something that admittedly would have really helped out the Forerunner during the Forerunner Flood War, but I'm just not sure if the Celestials can actually weaponize that power, and again, I have serious doubts whether that was actually them. Perhaps that was a more ancient race, because I just don't think the power levels of the Celestials really lines up with that sort of cosmic creation. So returning to the question of whether the Force is powerful enough to overcome the technological advantages of the Forerunner, my answer is I don't think so. All we really have to go off of is the Mortis arc from the Clone Wars. While we do see some impressive Force abilities, I don't think we see anything that will nullify the firing of a Halo ring, or that will be able to resist and fight back against the sheer production capabilities of the Forerunner. For all the reasons that I've mentioned so far, I give this battle to the ancient race from the Halo franchise. Admittedly though, this one is even more of a guess than normal. We know very little about the Celestials. We don't know whether the ones accurately represent all of the Celestials, whether they were corrupted or changed, and really what the greatest accomplishment of the Celestial Empire was. We know a lot about the Forerunners. I think it's clear that the technological difference is pretty obvious, and I don't think the Force abilities of the Celestials will be able to bridge that gap. However, I will say that is just my opinion. Love to hear what you guys think. Take a second right now, vote in the upper right hand corner, and let me know who you think would win this matchup. Also, down in the comments, let me know what you thought of my analysis, this matchup as a whole, and of course, which videos you'd like to see in the future. Thank you so much for watching, guys. As always, this has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.